This happened back when I was much younger. Back then, I had a friend who I played football with. Every Thursday after practice, we went back to his grandparents' house and had dinner with them. It had become a ritual for us to play hide and seek every Thursday after dinner, since the area his grandparents lived in had great hiding spots. Our hide and seek wasn't the typical hide and seek. It was something we made up ourselves. One person hid while the other sought, just like the usual game. But we had a unique rule. The seeker could call out 3 times during the game, and the hider had to make a noise if they heard it. It could be anything from a whisper to a loud yell, just something to let the seeker know they were getting close. There were no off-limit areas in the game. We could hide anywhere, inside the house or outside, and even go into the nearby woods. We had one favorite area in the house and 3 favorite areas outside the house. They were our battlegrounds because they had various hiding spots that were perfect for our game. Thursday came around and we had finished dinner, so it was time to play. We always looked forward to playing our hide-and-seek game. I insisted on being the seeker first. I checked all the usual spots, starting from inside and then making my way outside. I didn't find him, so I headed out into the woods. We occasionally hid out here too, but not too often and not too deep in the woods. Upon walking through the woods, I hadn't found him yet, but came closer and closer to this abandoned cabin, which we knew was there. We had never been this far from his grandparents while playing hide and seek, so no one has ever hidden near the cabin. As I approached the cabin, I yelled out that he should make a sound if he was near. I stood completely still and looked at the cabin while waiting for a noise, but I heard nothing. I tilted my head. As I made the movement, I saw a silhouette move out of the dusty window frame. I realized my friend was hiding in there, so I figured I would check it out. I called out to him, but there was still no response. Just a deadly silence. Irritated and convinced that he was cheating, I pushed the creaking door open and stepped inside. I found my way to some stairs leading up. It was hard to see anything since it had gotten dark and the only light I had was the moon shining through the windows. I went upstairs and went into the room that I had seen my friend through the window from outside. But he wasn't there. I heard a creak from the hallway and called out my friend's name and said he had to make a sound if he was there. I once again stood completely still and waited for a sound. I heard a short whistle sound. I thought to myself that I finally got him. Just as I was about to follow the sound, I heard another sound. It came from outside of the window. I turned my head with a fast motion and looked towards the window. I approached it and looked outside. I then saw my friend just a few feet away from the cabin, standing behind some trees. A surge of shockwaves ran through my body. I had no idea who was inside the cabin with me, and I had no idea how to get out of there. I just stood there listening for any footsteps coming my way, while thinking of a way to get out. It didn't look like it was a far jump to the ground from here, so I opened the window as quietly as I could. My friend heard that and started yelling at me. I tried to shush him, but he couldn't see me properly, so he kept yelling. While I was making my way out of the window, I heard footsteps quickly coming up the stairs. As I was about to jump, I saw a person enter the door frame. I jumped out and landed on my feet. I ran towards my friend and yelled that he should run because there was someone in there. He was confused and thought I joked, but as I kept running, he followed along. We ran back to his grandparents, panting and out of breath. We didn't say a word to them about it and went into my friend's room. He asked me what happened and I told him everything. We never went back, and our hide-and-seek games took on a much lighter tone after that night. I can understand the feeling of being terrified. I can understand your mind wanting to twist things so what you're looking at makes sense. I've experienced this terror and confusion. Thoughts were running through my head telling me this can't be real. I've never felt such fear before in my life, and now I'll share my story with you. It happened when my sister and I were teenagers, spending our vacation in the cabin our parents owned in the deep woods. We would go there every chance we got. Spring break, summer break, Christmas, whenever. We always had a blast during those vacations. Our parents had friends with kids and they all had cabins nearby. We'd run around the woods, play various games, build tree houses, you name it. But there was this one cabin nestled deeper in the woods that we'd been curious about for as long as we could remember. It was like no one had lived there for ages, and it was a bit off from the rest, surrounded by a thick grove of trees. As a kid, no one ever dared to get close to it. Fast forward a few years, and now we were teenagers. The need for an adrenaline rush was pushing us to finally explore the cabin. One day, a few of us gathered the courage to do just that. We slowly approached the cabin, discussing who should enter it first. By drawing the short straw, I had to go first. The door creaked open as if inviting us in, and we hesitantly stepped over the threshold. Upon entering, we got hit by a thick stench. We covered our noses and continued. Everything was a mess. The shelves was seconds from falling off the walls, and mold grew on the walls. It seemed like there had been no one in here for decades, but there were plates and half-eaten sandwiches lying around. Some of them a bit moldy, and some of them looked like they had plants growing out of them. It was creepy because, as I said, it didn't look like a home, but still seemed like someone was living here. We continued our way through the cabin and stumbled over a floor hatch, locked with a rusted padlock. Our curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to break it open. With a few heavy blows, it gave way, and the hatch revealed stairs leading downwards. The air grew colder and the atmosphere heavier. The smell was overwhelming. The stench that greeted us at our entry was much worse now, so much that it made us gag. The room was filled with animal remains, bones, corpses, and the remains of creatures we couldn't even identify. It was like a macabre graveyard, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dirt and grime. A swarm of flies was hovering over the pile. We were stunned, horrified, and sickened. We made our way back up to the cabin and slammed the door behind us. Even though our parents had told us several times not to go over there, we decided that it would be best to tell them about it. Our parents went to check for themselves and was glad we told them, even though we weren't supposed to be there in the first place. Authorities was contacted and everything eventually got removed from the area. I work as an executive in a pretty prominent business. I won't mention it, but just know that my job is very, very stressful and takes up nearly all of my free time. I do get a couple weeks of vacation every year. When I take it, I tend to go out and spend all of my time by myself. It's exactly what I need in order to recharge my batteries and get myself back in the frame of mind for work. Nowadays, I take my vacations in urban areas, but this wasn't always the case. In fact, I used to take my vacations in the hills. I would rent a nice cabin in the middle of nowhere and then just spend all my time alone. After 2 weeks of this, I was so ready to get back to work with enough energy to last for another year. I'll tell you why I don't do this anymore. A few years back, I was very, very exhausted. I rented a nice secluded cabin and was getting ready to have a nice time just reading a few good books by the fire. I don't want to mention exactly where this happened, but I can tell you it was very far from civilization. I preferred this because I got to see more wildlife, but also it was too far out for any real contact with the outside world. The company I rented the cabin from was in the closest town, over an hour-and-a-half drive down the mountain from the cabin. There were no phone lines or even a radio. The only way that I could communicate would be to get in my truck and drive to town. Now there were other cabins in the hills in this area, so although it wasn't usual, it was completely possible to see someone out in the woods. A few days into my vacation, I was sitting on the porch reading a book and having a drink. This was around mid-morning or noon. I heard a noise off in the distance and really didn't think about it too much. But when I heard more of a rustling, I finally turned in the direction of the noise. I noticed that there was a person out in the snowy trees. He wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, and I assumed he was just a hiker. When he noticed that I noticed him, he raised his hand and gave me a wave. I gave a friendly wave back. He was the first person I had seen in a few days, and I have to admit it was nice to not think I was the only person in the world. He walked off, and I went back to reading my book. I wasn't really paying attention to the time passing. However, I had gotten through a substantial portion of the book later that evening. As I was lost in thought, I was suddenly snapped back into reality by the sound of crunching. I listened, trying to figure out what exactly that sound was. It slowly got louder, then stopped. Then it slapped me in the face. Footsteps. Footsteps in the snow. I immediately got up and tried to see if I could hear it again. It was so quiet that I thought maybe I was just imagining things. Outside my bedroom window was a dark silhouette of a man. He was peering in, surveying the bedroom. I was frozen, wondering who this person was and why they were looking in. It was only when he lifted his hand to cup it around his eyes that I realized something was terribly wrong. In his hand, he held a hatchet. I just stood there, watching as he looked inside. He put his hand down and began to reach for the window. "Can I help you?" I said loudly, trying to sound intimidating but clearly sounding scared. It startled the man, and he quickly looked up in my direction. We stared at each other for what seemed like hours but were merely seconds. I couldn't see his face. He slowly backed away and started jogging away, never breaking eye contact with me until he was a good 20 feet from the cabin. What were his intentions with that hatchet? We'll never know. And it's sad to say that my last memory alone in that cabin was a horrible one.